All right, hello everybody, and welcome to today's edition of Committee for Sydney Live. I am Gabriel Metcalf, CEO of the Committee for Sydney, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today. To begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. We are all over Sydney and all over the world. I am currently on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people. Today, we are releasing a major report, Unleashing Sydney's Innovation Economy. It's my great pleasure to introduce the topic before bringing up our speakers. This report may feel like it is a response to COVID, but it's not originally. We actually launched this project a year ago, and it was already clear. That Australia's economy had some issues, and that Australia was going to be very reliant on Sydney to power the future economy. Every modern economy faces this problem of continually needing to reinvent itself, because jobs are constantly being destroyed by new inventions. The only way to create work for everyone is to therefore constantly create new jobs, new forms of work. That is always the case under capitalism, I suppose. But there are periods in history when that gets accelerated. There are periods of even greater disruption when whole industries shrink and new ones are created, new ones emerge. So that's always true. There were reasons to be worried about the generative capacity of Australia to generate new forms of work before COVID hit. It was also clear that Australia had some specific issues, mainly that it was so reliant on digging things out of the ground for exports, and that many of those exports were going to decline because of climate change. If you add to that the potential impacts of climate change on tourism, that if the European flight shaming movement really gains steam, that pillar of Australia's export economy could also be at risk. All of these were reasons we started this project. Now, with Australia in the worst recession since the 1930s, apparently, it all takes on an even greater urgency. It may seem like it is a difficult time to talk about reform and innovation when people are so afraid about the pandemic, and it's not a time when people are relaxed about making changes. But it's exactly during times of crisis when the opportunity emerges to make changes. So I want to give a special recognition to EY, which has been our research partner the whole time and contributed a huge amount of time and creativity to this effort. I want to thank the co-chairs, Baldur Toll of WeWork and Attila Brungs of UTS. And the format for today is you will hear from Eamon Waterford and Damien Smith. They will present the report. Then we will open it up for questions. You can submit them via the Q&A app on Zoom, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. Over to you, Eamon.
Thanks, Gabe. A little virtual hello to you from me and Damien. Hi, everybody. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Eamon Waterford. I'm the Director of Policy at the Committee for Sydney, and it has been my great pleasure to work on this project really intensively over the last sort of 6 to 9 months. And working closely with me has been Damien Smith, who's a partner at EY. I should also recognise Zoe Kosh, who works with Damien and his team and has been really instrumental on this. And I see that Zoe's online. Hey Zoe, how you going? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share some slides. This is a huge report from us. It's probably one of the biggest reports we've done for a very long time, and it's really detailed. And so bear with us as we go through some of that detail, because I think it's really interesting and really important, but it is technical. So let's jump in and let me start the conversation with, I suppose, the origins of this paper. As Gabe noted, this is a report that has been underway for some time now. And, you know, from sort of September last year, we worked really intensively on it. And earlier this year, we thought we nailed it. We thought we'd come up with a report that offered a good balance between comprehensive and urgent reform without pushing the Overton window too far in terms of the political capacity for reform to be undertaken. So some of our recommendations were perhaps a touch timid, but we thought they were useful and reflective of what we thought government would do. Then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, all of our preconceptions about what was possible were thrown out the window, and the urgency and the scale of both what reform is needed, but also the government's interest and capacity to reform has increased dramatically. So we have an opportunity to recast this work, and me and Damien and the team have been working really intensively over the last few months to recast this report in light of that. So a little bit of background for you. We spoke to a lot of people for this report. This is just a sprinkling. If your name is not on here and we spoke to you, we also spoke to you as well. There was many organisations, hundreds of conversations, lots of workshops, lots of in-depth conversations. We read deeply. There's so much really intense, useful information out in the world about this topic. And so we ingested all of that in desktop research as well. And really what we came up with is there's sort of two objectives we have when it comes to the innovation economy. We want to make sure that the economy provides, the innovation economy provides a support for national prosperity. Ultimately, we need to be able to export things out of Australia and make sure that Australia continues to be prosperous. As Gabe flagged, you know, digging things out of the ground only gets you so far. But we also don't want that to be a jobless growth. And that's especially true in light of COVID. We want to make sure that the innovation economy is providing good jobs for people so that everybody benefits from the growth of the innovation economy. What I'm going to do now is hand over to my colleague Damien, who's going to talk a little bit about the problem, and then he's going to throw it back to me to talk about some of the solutions we came up with. Damien, how you going?
Hi, Evan. Thanks for that. And thanks to the Committee for Sydney and its members for asking EY to help with this work on Sydney's innovation economy. I think we've really enjoyed working with you over the last 12 months. I think when we started this work in August last year, we had no idea that a global pandemic was just around the corner. But I think what we did know in August was that the Australian economy was facing some significant headwinds, as Gabriel mentioned. So if I think back, media at the time was dominated by trade wars, slowing wage growth, debates about monetary policy and stimulus packages, and the future was very uncertain. So we fast forward 12 months and that uncertainty has multiplied, and which I think is why this work on Sydney's innovation economy is even more relevant today than it was when we started the work last year. So I think it asked, why do we care about the innovation economy? And I think my answer to that is every day there are jobs that are created and lost because of market competition, new technologies, economic disruption, and increasingly because of climate change and automation. And I think that was even true, or that was true before COVID-19. So innovation helps us to replace jobs that have been lost by creating jobs that are more valuable and more productive in new markets with new products and new services. So new jobs are created by startups, they're created by existing companies, by universities and research bodies, which means any economic reform that needs to be wide-ranging to drive innovation across the economy. So put simply, I think innovation is about creating good jobs to ensure national prosperity. And I think this is a key to Australia's economic recovery going forward. So yeah, as we know, COVID-19 is the biggest disruption to the economy that we've seen for many generations. Its impacts have affected everyone. So the IMF expects our economy will contract by 4.5%. which actually means a loss of more than 6%, given we were growing before COVID-19 hit, which probably means the biggest contraction since the 1930s Great Depression. So everyone in Australia has been affected, and we're seeing job losses continue to rise. Many firms and industries are being deeply impacted. Some will change dramatically, and sadly, some will be lost forever. Many of our major export industries are under threat from COVID-19 and climate change. When we started this work in August last year, the view was that Australian exports, which are dominated by primary resources, are vulnerable to climate change impacts. Whilst that view hasn't changed at all, we're now seeing major impacts to value-added sectors, in particular the education and tourism sectors, which together account for 13% of exports. So this means that at least 1/5 of our exports are at risk from combined COVID-19 and climate change impacts. And the road to recovery is very uncertain. So put a different way, we are increasingly relying on only a few dominant industries. So the diversity and complexity of our economy is not keeping up with the rest of the world. So this chart here, it's produced by, it's the Atlas of Economic Complexity, which is it's published by the Harvard University, and Harvard University ranks Australia at number 87 in the world for diversity and uniqueness of our exports. So this puts us just behind Mali, which sits at number 85. 25 years ago, we were ranked at number 55. So we were just in between China and India 25 years ago. So what this chart is telling us is that the rest of the world is diversifying and creating new industries at a much faster rate than we are. And we're quickly falling behind. So we need to invest in new ideas. We need to create new products and services and create new markets, basically to future-proof our economy and to create good jobs for Australians. We haven't experienced a recession for 28 years, so it's probably fair to say our luck has run out. Most Australians under the age of 50 have never experienced a recession, and they've never had to worry about one. So this has been fantastic for our prosperity, it's been great for living standards and our national confidence, but it's also meant that we've had little appetite for change or for economic reform. So the next two charts show that our luck has probably been running out slowly but surely over time. So this first chart here shows how successful Australia has been compared to the rest of the world for almost 3 decades. What it also shows is that we had our lowest growth in 2019, just before COVID-19 hit. The next chart shows that our labour productivity has been steadily declining since 2012. So productivity reform is back on the political agenda, but because we've done little reform in the past 2 decades, it's fair to say we probably have a lot more work to do now. The good news is that we're well placed to take advantage of this moment. Our proximity to Asia is a blessing because Asia's strong growth is likely to accelerate, particularly given the response to COVID-19 has been more successful in some Asian countries. In fact, developing countries in Asia are the only countries globally that the IMF is expecting economic growth for this year. 8 of New South Wales's top 10 trading partners are located in Asia. So China is the biggest at 25%, but we also have strong trade links with Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia and Vietnam. And together they make up more than 1/3 of New South Wales's trade. Over the past 40 years, the global economy has gradually been shifting to Asia. So by the mid-2020s, we expect that Asia will account for 50% of the world's economy. And it's not just manufacturing that's driving this rapid growth. Asia is also creating substantial knowledge-based and innovation-based industries. So being close to Asia is an advantage for us, but we need to accelerate our innovation economy so that we can benefit from Asia's growth and be a part of that knowledge-based and innovation-based growth. I think nowhere else in our economy is the need for reform more urgent than in the innovation economy. So there's an index that gets produced each year, the Global Innovation Index, and that index provides strong evidence for the urgency of reform. So the index ranks Australia at number 15 on inputs to innovation. We score very well on market sophistication, education and research capabilities, and support from governing institutions. However, the index ranks Australia at number 31 for the outputs that we produce, which basically means we're a long way behind in transforming ideas into commercial success stories. Whilst we have great stories from industry and universities about research and development, relative to other global cities, we don't rank so well when it comes to capitalising on our knowledge and our creativity. So growing the innovation economy is essential for creating good jobs and ensuring national prosperity for Australians and helping our economy to recover. And I think the reforms that Eamon will now talk to will go a long way to growing our innovation economy. Thanks, and I'll hand over to you, Eamon.
Thanks, Damien. Yeah, so enormous opportunity, enormous challenge, but enormous opportunity for New South Wales, for Australia, for Sydney right now. We looked really broadly. We started with, I suppose, very specific spatial solutions for Sydney, and we realised that actually, as we went through this and we're reading through and talking to people, that a lot of the solutions needed are at that macro national level. Some are at the state level, some are at the national level, some are specific to Sydney, but it's worth noting that a lot of these recommendations will have spillover benefits for everywhere in Australia. Sydney will benefit the most as Australia's largest economy, but largest urban economy, but of course, everybody will benefit from some of these recommendations. So broadly, there were 5 things we thought Australia needed to do, Sydney needed to do. We need to invest government dollars in important research and development efforts. We need to make it easy to start new companies and create new jobs. We need to make our underlying economic systems more efficient. We need to make it easy for talented people to come and stay in Sydney. And we need to make sure Sydneysiders have the skills they need to be successful. So working through those, investing government dollars in important R&D efforts. Currently, the R&D spend in Australia is woefully low. We're well below the OECD average, and there is significant problems in terms of boosting the innovation economy and creating new ideas, new jobs if we don't boost our R&D spend. EY did some analysis of what the impact would be of boosting R&D from our current level of 1.8% GDP up to the OECD average of 2.4%. This would result in 8,000 brand new jobs that wouldn't otherwise occur, and an additional $4 billion invested into Australia every year. So the impacts would be quite substantial getting to the average. We think we need to far exceed the average. You'll note that many countries that Australia likes to compare itself to, Israel, South Korea, sit well above that level of 2.4%. In order to do this, there's a few things that Australia can do. We can get a premium rate on the R&D tax rate if you partner with research institutions. We can introduce things like patent box schemes. We can take on the New Zealand government's classification for software development. At the moment, if you're doing software development, it's very unclear and in fact likely that you don't qualify for research and development tax incentives. And we can encourage SMEs to do more R&D. Another thing that we can do in terms of investing government dollars is funding national missions led by the CSIRO or by other research institutions. The CSIRO has identified a dozen really crucial missions that it wants to achieve. These are kind of moonshots that government, the private sector and research institutions all collaborate on to solve for. The original moonshot, of course, was getting to the moon, led by NASA in America. The spillover benefits of that moonshot were enormous in terms of the development of the computers and many other technologies that we use every day. So these national missions have enormous spillover benefits for the innovation economy, and they really focus people's attention and energy into a specific thing. As I said, CSIRO has identified 12 missions that it would like to achieve. We think these are great and government should fund them. We also think government should be the first customer as much as possible. The US has a program called the SBIR, where major departments of the US government have to invest a percentage of their procurement budget into working with SMEs. There are problems with the project. It's not by any means a silver bullet, but it's a good idea that Australia and New South Wales should adopt. We should have a program that actually incentivises government to procure products from SMEs. At the moment, often governments are very reticent to procure from SMEs because doing so risks probity concerns as you work with the SME to scale up their delivery. But if you provide a specific stream for SMEs, you can avoid that probity challenge. The second is to make it easy to start new companies and create new jobs. This is something really we often talk about cutting red tape, but there's a bunch of things the government can do both proactively and getting out of the way that will encourage this. Startup incubators, accelerators and makerspaces are a really, really important part of the innovation ecosystem. New South Wales Treasury already puts in a little bit of money into the Sydney Startup Hub and a few other startup programs, but we would like to see a massive increase in the amount of investment into this space. There's a really great model that comes out of Israel called the Yozma model, where the government actually partners with a funding program, whether it's a VC or similar program, to fund accelerators and incubators. But there could also be operational funding that really creates that backbone structure to allow those accelerators, incubators and makerspaces to scale up. We have employee share schemes in Australia that allow companies, particularly small companies, to offer some of the money that gets paid to staff as shares rather than as direct money. That can be really good for small companies that are growing quickly because they're often cash poor, but with enormous upside potential as the company grows. It also turns out that it's intensely beneficial when it comes to the productivity of a company. It turns out that staff, when incentivized through owning shares in a company, when they're incentivized to see a company do well, the company does very well. And essentially what this chart here shows is that a small company that offers employee share schemes sees somewhere in the realm of 500% more value added per employee than a company that does not. And these are huge numbers. When we first saw this, I thought, oh, no, we're out by a number of scales here, but it turns out it's enormous numbers. At the moment, it's really, really hard to do, and you can't do it for very many staff. So we need to reform the rules that go around that and allow people to collect more in terms of share value. We need to broaden the early stage innovation company tax incentives. This is where, as I said, we get into the detail. In order to qualify as an ESIC and get a capital gains discount, we need to expand it to allow that startup founders to also gain this. At the moment, if you invest in an early stage innovation company, you can get some discount on capital gains tax. But if you're the founder of the company, you don't get that same discount. This seems perverse if we're trying to incentivize people to go out and be entrepreneurs. We also should be providing tax relief for investors and removing the requirement that accelerators have to be going through a single cohort before they're eligible to be for their companies to be classified as ESICs. Essentially, this will all get the innovation economy moving quicker and growing the scale of the ecosystem quicker. At the moment, you can get a grant to export your products and through Austrade, encourages people to get out and sell their products in other countries. But a lot of the grants that you can receive require you to physically go to another country or to physically bring people to Australia. It's an easy, obvious fix that right now that money can't be spent. No one's allowed to leave the country. No one's allowed to come into the country, at least not without some difficulty. So we should be reallocating that money across to digital forms of engagement. But this program is really, really popular. People love it, and increasingly year on year, there's less and less money per firm that would like to take advantage of this. So we'd like to see the overall funding envelope increased. It's been increased a little bit in the last 3 months, but it needs to be increased quite dramatically. We need to reduce payroll tax for new innovation companies. This is something the state government has identified through their Federal Financial Relations Review. But payroll tax is a very inefficient tax, and it fundamentally discourages companies from growing. So if we're not going to get rid of payroll tax entirely, which is not a bad idea, frankly, we should at the very least be providing tax exemptions for early stage innovation companies that are perhaps up to 3 years old. And we need to expand venture capital tax exemptions for domestic investors. At the moment, you get an exemption if you're a foreign investor into an Australian firm, but not if you're a domestic investor. And so this means that all that money tied up in the superannuation schemes is not actually encouraged to move into startups. And so we think this exemption should be expanded to support domestic investors investing into startups in a much bigger way. So that's for making companies work better. We're going to keep on going into the underlying economic systems that Sydney is facing. The biggest one is that the taxation system is a mess. We have far too many taxes that are inefficient, and many of the taxes that we rely on to fund large parts of pretty important government services disincentivise the innovation economy. There's been recently an announcement of a short-term investment allowance regime that essentially allows people to claim off their tax any investment they make into their company, purchasing plant and the like. We think that should be a permanent fixture in the regime so that people could actually claim 50% of the cost of something when they purchase plant for their company immediately, and then allow them to still depreciate the full 100% of the value of the product over time. We also need to reform the New South Wales taxation system. We've flagged payroll, but of course stamp duties is also one that's deeply inefficient. And we fundamentally won't see this happen unless the Australian government also offers incentives to support those states to undertake reform. This is a live debate happening right now on the front pages of the Australian Financial Review, but it's something that we certainly support. Australia's internet is bad. There's really no ways around that. Even with the NBN rolling out, we are still deeply behind the 8 ball. At the very least, we should be average. We're not even average. And the internet is so important for any form of innovation at this moment in time. So we think we need to speed up the internet. Whether that's at a citywide level or at a national level, it has to happen. And innovation precincts are an incredibly important part of the ecosystem. They're an incredibly important part of the government's policy on innovation. And so we need to make sure that we're getting innovation precincts at work fundamentally well. There are key factors that we've seen when we review the literature, when we talk to people internationally about what makes innovation precincts succeed. So we need to make sure that those factors are available and true in places in the innovation precincts that we're funding in Sydney. One slight diversion here that I wanted to flag, there's actually a really important role to play in terms of supporting the innovation economy by making Sydney livable and affordable. Whilst these recommendations are not specific to innovation, I wanted to call them out because they're relevant to making sure that Sydney is able to survive as an innovation economy. Fundamentally, if people can't afford to live in Sydney, they won't become entrepreneurs. And the high cost of housing in Sydney is one of the key factors that we've found that make people resistant to taking risks like starting a new company. At the same time, global talent, people that are able to live anywhere in the world, yes, they want a good economy. Yes, they want access to good talent that they can grow their company with, but they also want to be able to have fun. And if Sydney's not a livable place, it's not an enjoyable place to live, then people won't stay here. So fundamentally, some of these reforms, whilst not specific to the innovation economy, we think are absolutely important and really go to the, I guess, the core of many of the other Committee for Sydney advocacy positions. So that last point is related to this one. We want to make it easy for talented people to come to Sydney, and we want to make sure that they stay here. So at the moment, we have an entrepreneurship visa. If you're an entrepreneur and you want to move to Sydney and you want to move to Australia, you can, but it's fundamentally incredibly difficult to do. You have to pay $4,000, that's the first thing. You have to also have secured $200,000 in funding from Australian sources before you land in Australia. You can imagine how difficult that might be for an entrepreneur who's got an idea for a startup, who wants to move to Sydney because they see that there's an enormous ecosystem growing and they're excited to be part of it. But they have to find time and links to make a whole bunch of meetings with VC funders before they get here to somehow secure $200,000 before we'll even let them come. The kicker is, once we let them come, we'll only let them stay for 4 years, and we won't let them stay forever. So someone might start an amazing company in Sydney, but we are telling them, if you come here, you will have to go home at some point. Even if your company is amazing, even if it's the next Atlassian, the next unicorn, please go home. This is fundamentally uncompetitive. We compare that to somewhere like Canada, where the requirement is you need to have enough money to support your family. You your family is just you, well, that's $15,000, the minimum wage for 1 year. So if you've got 15,000 bucks in the bank, we don't even want your money. You just have to have it, and we will give you a permanent visa immediately. It'll cost you $1,500 and you can stay here forever. So you compare the Canadian system to the Australian system, you can see that any entrepreneur that's currently looking around for a safe haven, a great city that's both livable, affordable, with a great innovation ecosystem to start a new company, they won't be picking Sydney, they'll be picking Toronto. And that's fundamentally a big problem for us. So we need to make it much easier. We also need to reform the global talent visa. At the moment, if you want to secure a globally talented person from around the world and bring them to Sydney, you can, but it's kind of hard to do. You have to pay quite a lot of money up front. There's a Skilling Australia fund that you have to pay into. It's about $5,000 for every visa that you secure. And you have to be paying them quite a lot of money, which is fine for lots of industries where people get paid a lot. But if you're a startup, or if you work in the cultural sector, where perhaps $150,000 is too much, it's not as much as you're willing to pay for someone who still meets the criteria as being globally talented, we need a version that brings the salary down and removes the requirement for you to pay into that. We need to also support international students to stay in Australia. One of the best pieces of soft power and ability to build links into global countries around the world is through international students. Australia, Sydney holds more international students, or it did 6 months ago, than any city around the world except for London and New York. And at the moment, we're really struggling on this front, but we need to incentivize people to come back and to stay. So we're really pleased to see that Home Affairs has already announced that if you study online as part of your degree, we will allow you to count that towards a post-study work visa. But we also need to give people access to a 4-year visa so they can actually put down roots and start working. We also think that if they start working here and over that 4 years they maintain work in a key industry like advanced manufacturing or computer science, we should allow them to stay here forever. At the moment, if you're a student in Australia, it's actually very hard to stay in Australia forever, even if you are an incredibly talented person with a PhD. There is a way that the New South Wales Department of Treasury can tweak this, but fundamentally this is a federal government issue. Finally, we need to make sure that Sydneysiders have the skills they need to be successful. We need to reform VET, the vocational education and training sector. We've seen some really great reforms in light of COVID, rapid retraining to ensure that retraining is frictionless and get people out of sectors that are perhaps not doing so well right now into sectors that are growing. We also need to work on this idea of micro-credentialing, which is a time commitment. But we also have this slight challenge where if you want to train up a VET teacher who then in turn trains people, it actually takes quite a long time to train them up. So we need to have a way of recognising experience in sectors so that we can get teachers out in the field quickly to train people up to quickly retrain. That makes sense. We've got to teach the teachers quickly. We need to fund lifelong learning. At the moment, we have we have long service leave in Australia. It's a scheme that actually hasn't been reformed since the 1960s when the New South Wales Long Service Leave Act was introduced. And really, no one my age has ever used it. Turns out that staying with one company for 7 to 10 years is something that's just not a reality for many people in the economy today. And so the long service leave scheme is just fundamentally not something that's particularly helpful. At the same time, it's cumbersome for companies and it's a slight pain in the butt. We're also scratching our head about how we manage to get people to continue to retrain over their life. And so we propose that we convert long service leave into a lifelong learning scheme that you get access to regardless of how long you work at a company after a year. And it carries along with you, but encourages you and supports you to take time out of the workforce to go back and get further study. Finally, we need to plug the funding gap for universities. There are a number of different ways we can do this. It hasn't been solved yet, although we've got some ideas. It probably involves funding the full cost of research. At the moment, only staff is covered and not the labs that those staff work in. It probably involves some sort of intervention in the light of COVID and the collapse in international students. It probably involves something around the national missions and supporting universities to undertake headline research that's going to help solve big problems for Australia. But fundamentally, if our universities fall over, we are in deep trouble, and it's really, really important that this incredibly valuable, incredibly powerful and globally impactful university sector is supported to make its way through COVID and out the other side. those are our challenges. So I suppose I will turn it back to Gabriel, but before I do, I just wanted to reiterate thank you to EY for their support, thank you to Attila and Boulder, and of course thank you to our Innovation Fund partners. These are the companies that support the Committee for Sydney and the work that we do in our research program. It's Dexus, it's the ICC, it's Western Sydney University, it's McKinsey and Company, it's Campbelltown City Council, and it's the Housing and Property Group from the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. And if it looks like I'm looking at my phone, it is because I had to get the name of the department exactly right. Back to you, Gabe.
Okay, thanks so much, guys. Look, that took a while to get through because it's a really amazing report. It's really extensive and yeah, has very, very specific recommendations across all of those topics, which will comprise part of the committee's advocacy agenda going forward. That's how this works. So feel free to submit questions or free advice via the Q&A app on Zoom. We've already got some good ones coming in. Let me start with a political question. Malcolm Turnbull made a big run at innovation, and the interpretation, at least, that a lot of people give is that scared people. When people heard the word innovation, when he said the word innovation, people heard, my job is going away. What will it take to help people feel like there's something in this for them?
Yeah, well, a global pandemic probably helps. I mean, I think people are scared at the moment that their jobs are going away. They're seeing their jobs going away. They're seeing their kids' jobs go away. They're seeing entire industries just disappear off the face of the map. So probably the political realities of this are less of a concern than they were at the time that Turnbull releases. I also think there's perhaps a communications issue. You know, talking about innovation without talking about good jobs and the need to provide good jobs makes people scared. But framing it fundamentally in that concept of how do we create the next generation of good jobs for Australians is probably one of the ways that you resolve that challenge.
Okay. This report is about Sydney's innovation economy. What about the rest of New South Wales? Is this good for them or bad for them?
Well, so let's start off by saying that, you know, I think there's been a Sydney-centric focus on innovation, but also a very much a focus when it comes to innovation on the Sydney CBD. And we think that there's opportunity for innovation across all of Greater Sydney, being the Committee for Sydney, unsurprisingly, and of course opportunities in other locations. I will say that innovation tends to be pretty strongly an urban issue. So whilst there's opportunities for the innovation economy in Wollongong and Newcastle, outside of those areas, it's hard to find the scale of workforce to really start that up. But there are great examples of people like Blue River Group who are doing really interesting work with ag tech and the like in the regions. The other point I would make is that this is not a zero-sum game. Success for Sydney means success for New South Wales, means success for Australia. Sydney being successful is pretty fundamental and pretty crucial when it comes to the hollowing out of our economy if things like the mining industry disappear, if things like tourism take longer to return than we expected them to. It's quite likely that Sydney's going to have to be picking up a lot of the slack and supporting the regions as a result of that. So I wouldn't want to frame this up as an either or.
Damien, looking at the data, and in a sense, there was a division of labor in the presentation where you presented the problem and Eamon presented the solutions. Damien, did you see anything in the data that surprised you as part of this project?
I think the thing, I'm not sure it surprised me, but I think the thing that got a lot of people talking was probably the last slide that I put up, where on our Global Innovation Index, where we're ranked number 15 in terms of being really good at research, being really good at knowledge and creativity, but actually being ranked, I think it was number 31, on actually being able to commercialise that knowledge and creativity and maximise actually capitalise on that and maximise how we do that. I think there's been a lot of discussion about our ability to do that in Sydney and nationally, and I think that got a lot of conversation going, and particularly when we had a workshop at the end of last year. And I think some people sort of strongly felt that was true, and a lot of people felt that, you know, we are being quite good at commercialising research. So there's a lot of really good examples where universities are working with the private sector to do exactly that. But I think there's also some really good examples of where we've missed opportunities to commercialise research, and that's gone off overseas and offshore, and other countries have basically taken advantage of the research that we've done. So I'm not sure it surprised me, but it definitely got a lot of conversation going, I think. And I think that's kind of the point of what we're sort of saying today, is that we need to get better at capitalising on our ideas, I think. Yeah.
A couple of questions have come in about the culture that underpins innovation. This report is about policy changes, meaning generally things governments can do, because that's what you can kind of intentionally change. But if you look at places like Silicon Valley, where I come from, a lot of people have come to the feeling that you have to interpret the success of that innovative ecosystem in terms of culture. And one of the things people point to a lot would be a tolerance for failure. People who go on to have several failed startups before they finally get to one that works. Does anything need to change in the Australian culture or the Sydney culture to support the innovation economy?
Yeah, so every interview that I did with people, I asked them, do you think Australians have an entrepreneurial culture? And every single person said no. You know, fundamentally, I think we lack that entrepreneurial culture that other societies, other cultures have. And that's a challenge, and we need to turn that around. One thing I did start to see a lot of in the data is that is quite generational. Certainly university students coming through universities today have a much more entrepreneurial approach and a much greater willingness to take risks than probably previous generations did, even at the same age. And that's in part being supported by really great entrepreneurship programs at universities. You know, UTS has a really great entrepreneurship school. Pretty much every university's got really fantastic startup hubs and encouraging students to get involved in starting companies and thinking about commercialization. So one answer is it's going to wash through as the next generation of people at universities come through. They will be bringing that entrepreneurial culture with them. Beyond that, I think government policy can be a leader as far as signalling for people that that there is a safety net for them to take risks, and that the government is interested in supporting people to take risks. So some of the recommendations we've made, whilst not directly addressing that culture question, send that message to people around there is a willingness and an openness for you to take risks, and you know, you're not going to be destitute as a result.
Yeah, it's a very complicated question, how a culture has changed. Yeah, Damien?
I was going to say, I think that generational point that Eamon made is really important, because I think Australia's been very good at innovation in primary resources, so in mining and ag tech and the like. I think there's a new generation coming through that we're encouraging to be comfortable with taking risks and actually being comfortable with failing and having to try new things, and failing is an okay thing. I think in the past that culture hasn't been there in Australia, I think, and I think I can see that coming through, but I think we need to support that culture change. And I know I've heard, Gabriel, I've heard you talk about that a lot from the States, where that culture about taking risks and failing fast is in there a lot. So I feel like we need more of that.
Yeah. Damien, a question about wage rates. Certainly, yeah, places like California have higher cost of labor than New South Wales, but for advanced manufacturing, you know, this idea of doing more with the materials that are dug out of the ground here,
yeah,
is the is the Australian wage structure a barrier?
So yeah, I saw that question. So I mean, probably the first thing I'd say is that the Australian economy is strong because of the primary resources that we have. So mining and agriculture, and a good example of that is iron ore at the moment, where that's helping to support our budget surplus. So not saying that the economy is strong because of that, but I think where we do struggle to compete is in production where it's high labour intensity. So yes, we do have high labour costs relative to developing parts of the world. But I think all that means is where we need to focus our innovation is on areas of high value add or higher value. So it's things like technology, advanced manufacturing, medical products, and even where we're value adding to primary resources. So there's a good project at the moment looking at hydrogen energy research, and we've got the knowledge and the skills and the technology to do that research and actually to add value or create a new source of energy. So we need to be looking at the products and the services that are high value, because whilst we probably do have a higher labour rate than developing countries or other countries globally, we also have the knowledge and the institutions to sort of focus more on those higher value industries, if we can put it like that.
Yeah. Amen.
One thing I'd add, often we focus on, which part of the chain, the supply chain, are we uncompetitive in, and say, oh, well, because we're uncompetitive in that part of the chain, we shouldn't bother with the rest of it. What COVID has really shown up is the need for robust supply chains and robust, no longer are we talking just in time, we're talking just in case things. So whilst we might be uncompetitive in a particular part, there's no reason why we shouldn't be investing in the totality of that supply chain, from digging something out of the ground into turning it into a microchip or whatever, that actually, on balance, the whole thing is an enormous value add, and Australia's missing a trick by not having that whole chain in country.
A couple of questions have come in about precincts, which I want to maybe combine here. The committee for Sydney has really gone big on the idea of innovation precincts and brought in a whole series of leading global experts on that idea. And in fact, the government of New South Wales has also gone big. It's been one of the major efforts of New South Wales government is to set up these innovation precincts. What you tried to do in this report, Eamon, is sort of figure out how to take that to the next step by identifying success factors. What does it take for it to not just be, a notional area drawn on a map, but to really make it real, to really make it not just descriptive of what's already happening, but actually a vector for change. One of the ideas that you foregrounded is the need to have some supportive anchor institutions. So an obvious one is how the new airport is an asset that supports agribusiness in terms of being able to fly things out 24 hours a day. What else did you come up with in terms of kind of the theory behind what it takes for these innovation precincts to be real?
Right. So the first thing I would say is that this report undercooks the importance of innovation precincts, and that's, as you say, reflective of the fact that government's already doing quite a lot in this space. So we didn't feel the need to sort of reiterate, yes, good work, keep it going. Innovation precincts are very important. They're not the only way that innovation happens, but they certainly have a really important role to play, and that's shown in global research. When we talk about anchor tenants and those institutions that anchor that, airports are really important. Major pieces of infrastructure are really important. A port is not a bad thing either. Universities are probably the most impactful thing. Having a university campus that's research focused is really, really powerful. But you really need to have a kind of a goal or a vision for the innovation precinct. It's not sufficient to just declare something as this is where innovation happens and then hope that it just sort of happens. You've got to be quite prescriptive and intentional about, you know, shaping who's in that precinct, shaping how they interact, shaping, you know, a strong focus on a particular goal, a particular objective for that precinct in order for it to happen. So, you know, a good example of that would be, as you say, AgTech at the airport. It does mean encouraging AgTech companies to go there. It probably also means stopping non-AgTech companies from going there, or discouraging them, or encouraging them to go elsewhere. You know, it's part of the point in curating an innovation precinct is that, you know, the market itself probably won't just get there alone. Otherwise, these things would be popping up naturally without any government intervention. So there is some extent where you probably have to be intervening in the market, you know, some industry policy to encourage particular companies to come there, to encourage your anchor tenants to land there, maybe providing them with support, maybe providing them with incentives, money, to get them to land there, to curate that precinct to work well.
Amen.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I think precincts are actually about picking winners in a way. So special activation precincts are all about saying we're going to specialise in this particular sector, and we're going. I think Eamon used the word curating, and I think that's a really important point. Is that you're curating innovation, and you're picking that sector to be a success. And I think really by doing that, what you're doing is you're giving support to companies to come in and actually have that confidence to take a risk and actually come in and create something and do something new. And that's exactly what we're trying to get at, is that this is about taking a risk and creating new jobs. And I think government's role in that is actually to streamline that process and give companies confidence to do that by curating precincts and actually picking winners.
A question about industrial relations, which is in fact not a topic you mention in the report. Certainly some of the American tech companies report that the key to their success was changing something in you know, they don't use the term IR, they use HR, human resources culture. So Google figured out that they could test for coding excellence, and so now they don't care if you went to uni. If you pass their coding test, you can be a coder at Google, and they view that as an innovation driven by their HR department. Netflix said there's no vacation days, you just take as much as you want. And all of these companies have something like that, some part of their corporate culture that really changed the rules on what we here would call IR. Does Australia need to be more flexible in its rules on IR in order to allow innovation to flourish?
It's interesting, right? Like most of the examples that these massive companies declare are well above and beyond perks that people get beyond IR. So in that sense, no, you don't need to make the IR laws any more flexible, because you can just do that stuff. If people want to give more than 4 weeks leave, go ahead and do whatever you want. There's probably an extent to which there is, you know, there is real rigidity around the sort of the definition of a permanent employee, a contractor, and you know, a supplier, and that blurring has that we're seeing in other economies is happening in Australia, but not being articulated in the IR. So whether that's flexibility or just, you know, rationalising our IR system to reflect the reality, the lived experience of people's work life, I don't know, but yeah, probably something.
Yeah, I definitely agree. There's a blurring between roles, and even a couple of years ago, we used to talk about people having a side hustle, and I think I'm not even sure we use the term side hustle anymore, because a lot of people sort of are doing multiple things at the same time. And I think, yeah, definitely, I think companies are starting to understand that and starting to realise that flexibility for employees is a good thing, because it gives them the freedom to be more creative and to be more connected and to chase down ideas. And a bit of a plug for EY, I think we definitely have that flexibility. So we we give our staff time to go off and actually chase new ideas or actually have a side hustle or work flexibly. You know, I don't think EY is unique like that either. So I think that's becoming more the norm, where people will have multiple things and multiple interests. And I think, yeah, I definitely think we should encourage that, because it just goes back to what I was saying before about giving people the confidence to try new things and try it a lot and fail fast.
I did realise I gave the wrong answer, which of course should have been, yes, unlimited vacation days is obviously the right solution, Gabe. We should totally do that.
Eamon, is Sydney in competition with Melbourne for the innovation economy?
A little bit. Shouldn't be, but it is. I mean, we're too myopic about it. We often think of Melbourne as the competition, when the reality is that at the scale we are, we're too small to compete by ourselves, and we should be collaborating to compete against, you know, major innovation economies around the world. Tel Aviv is not competing with other Israeli cities. Tokyo is not competing with other Japanese cities. They have a system where there is competitive advantage and industrial policy that allocates different priorities to different cities and lets them get on with it in collaboration with each other. And there's no reason why we couldn't do that. You know, 5 million people each in each of those cities, throw in a couple of extra million for the hinterlands around them, maybe throw in Brisbane, a couple of extra million there. You're starting to get a workforce, an economy of a scale that's genuinely globally competitive against, you know, those mega regions, those super regions around the world, like your SoCal and your NorCal and your, I can't remember what they call it, but the Washington, New York, Boston precinct, and, you know, these places that are multi-centered innovation hubs.
All right. In closing, I want to again thank the Committee for Sydney's Innovation Fund partners. These are the members that are making a major investment in our research capacity. Currently, it's Dexis, the ICC, Western Sydney Uni, Campbelltown Council, McKinsey, and the Housing and Property Group in DeepHigh. But some of you watching could join that amazing list of members. Let me know if you're interested. Damien and Eamon, thank you for all of the hard work over a year to develop these. I want to commit to all of you watching that this is going to remain an area of focus for the committee moving forward. What happens when we do these research projects? We come up with ideas, we come up with solutions for problems, and then we stick with them. We do the advocacy work, we do the media work to try to move these ideas into the mainstream and hopefully over time get some of them enacted. There is so much going right for Sydney's economy, but we could really unleash it. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next edition of Committee for Sydney Live.